Indus Valley Civilization. Indus Valley Civilization was the first urban civilization in India. Indus Valley, the name is derived from the fact that most of the urban sites have been discovered or they were located close to the river Indus and its tributaries. It was a riverine civilization like many of the contemporary civilization of that time. But in terms of its geographical spread that we will discuss, we will see it was greater than any of the other riverine civilization. Indus Valley civilization was also a civilization known for its vast trade networks, meticulous town planning, its script which has not yet been deciphered, and also its established belief system exhibited on its numerous seals. From the point of view of history, Indus Valley civilization is also known as the Harappan civilization, as the first site was discovered, it was excavated at Harappa in the present day Pakistan. In history, Indus Valley civilization belongs to the proto-historic era. So it belongs to proto-historic era because in history, as we have already discussed during the Stone Age, the knowledge, the historical knowledge, the archaeological knowledge of all the artifacts and everything that we know about the people of Indus Valley is derived from archaeological evidences, excavations, and there are literary evidences also. That is, the Indus Valley people knew about the knowledge of writing, or there was a script. We will discuss more about the script a bit later. But what makes it proto-historic is the fact that the script has not been deciphered. And the literary reference or the literary knowledge about this civilization is based from other contemporary texts, such as the Mesopotamian text, referred to trade with Meluha. Meluha is something that we have heard about in the book by Amish, Immortals of Meluha. Meluha was correlated, it was an ancient name of India, or at least parts of northwest India. So proto-historic era is that era in which the knowledge, historical knowledge is based on archaeological evidence and literary reference is based on other contemporary sources, because here the script has not been deciphered. It has not yet been deciphered. Indus Valley civilization as the first urban civilization. It changed the outlook with which the world looked upon India. We will understand how accidentally some of the British travelers, geographers, and archaeologists stumbled upon bricks. The bricks which were the foundation building material of the urban structures. The Harappans were known for the use of sun-dried or kiln-fired bricks, which have survived the times, the decades, the centuries, and even more than 2000 years. So let us first understand how did the British chance upon and how was the knowledge of such a vast urban civilization gathered accidentally. The story goes that in 1829, Charles Mason, who was given a punishment for some wrong deeds, and he was given a chance to redeem himself by collecting historical artifacts. So in 1829, he was roaming around in Sindh, Balochistan and northwest present India. And suddenly he saw certain historical artifacts, most of which were brick structures. He did not know what they were, but he was sure that these were sometimes used in the past as residential places. He, anyways, was not able to date what was the time period during which this civilization or the settlement during that time existed. He made a guess. He said that probably these settlements belong to post-Aryan era, because the Europeans were mesmerized by the Brahminical culture with the advent of Aryans. Similarly, in 1843, another geographer, Alexander Burns, He was traveling along the river Indus to study the navigational potential of river Indus, mainly for its commercial value. He also saw certain bricks, and he also came to the same conclusion that it belonged to probably the Buddhist era. After 1857 revolt, when by the Government of India Act 1858, there was a handover of Indian administration from the East India Company to the British Crown. The Archaeological Survey of India, which was one of the unnoticed but yet significant contribution of Lord Dalhousie, its first Director General, Alexander Cunningham. He had he had seen certain reports of travelers of earlier times who had referred to some settlement along River Indus. He went and he visited Harappa, and he also came to the conclusion that probably this settlement, this community belonged to the Buddhist era. Matters remained unsolved. It remained a mystery for the next 30-40 years until Lord Curzon, who also was very much interested in preserving historical archaeological artifacts, appointed John Marshall as the next Director General. John Marshall understood that to unravel the mystery, we need the support of indigenous historians who understand the Indian language and Indian customs better. So, from around 1917-18, discoveries started, and in 1920, Harappa was excavated on a large scale, and they declared Harappa belonging to a significant urban civilization. So they declared that Harappa was a urban site. Coincidentally, in 2020, the centenary, the 100 years of discovery of IVC was completed. And in 2020, a number of remarkable discoveries, a number of important revelations came out in the open with respect to Indus Valley civilization. So beginning from 1921, with the help of important historians, notable historians Dayaram Shahni, R.D. Banerjee, the other sites, later Mohenjo-daro, Kalibangan, Rakhigadi, all of them, Chanu-daro, all these sites were discovered. And what was more remarkable was not only the geographical extent, the level of meticulous planning, which could be figured out easily at a certain glance, was the fact that this civilization dated to pre-Christ era. So now the Western myth, the Western civilizational myth that they were superior and more primitive than any of the civilization of the world, it was broken, and this gave a new interpretation to Indian history, which was celebrated by nationalists. So the nationalist historians, they glorified the discovery of IVC, a civilization which was greater than any of the contemporary civilizations of its time and also for many centuries to come. And IVC, many people, many civilizations, many countries could not match the magnanimity to which it extended and managed its resources. So now let us understand about this chapter. And the importance of this chapter is not only from the point of view of history, but also the applicability of the knowledge, of the wisdom related to town planning, related to their belief system, which is applicable even today. In 2015, when Chennai was facing floods, urban floods, and floods are a recurring, unfortunately, they are a phenomena who have not been tamed despite multiple developments in urban planning. So question came in UPSC that what leaf can we draw from the IVC drainage management? So the study of IVC is important also from the point of view of the legacy, the vast repertoire of knowledge that the people of IVC have left for us to use in our daily lives. Talking about the origin, evolution, and the decline, during the study of our Stone Age, we had understood how the beginning of agriculture started in India. Agricultural development, as Tony Joseph in his book Early Indians has recently stated, on the basis of a number of discoveries and interpretations, investigations of DNA and chromosome, that the first agricultural community in India they were in the Mehergarh, Baluchistan region. So definitely we see the agricultural community of Mehergarh in Baluchistan, they started expanding. So out of these agricultural communities, the rise of IVC as an urban civilization was not a sudden process, as it has been stipulated, as it has been presented by some of the historians. Some historians believe that people from Mesopotamia came, they settled, and these traders and merchants, they founded this civilization. Later, this theory was also rejected, and now the most acceptable theory about the rise or the origin of Indus Valley is the evolution theory. The evolution theory or the theory of indigenous origin. The theory of indigenous origin says how from small agricultural rural community over a period of time catalyzed by various factors, we see the rise of urban phase. And even this transition was not sudden. It happened that initially there were small agricultural communities. This gave rise to a proto-urban phase. So now we had villages, we had certain practices which would be continued in the mature urban phase, and then catalyzed by certain triggers or beneficial factors, we see the rise of mature Harappan phase. A phase in which all the characteristic features of IVC that we will talk about would be seen. And this maintained, this remained for the next, say, 900 years. But unfortunately, from around 1900 BC, decline set in. What were the factors? This we will also see. And again, there are multiple interpretations regarding how this vast civilization, which managed, which planned everything right from a small needle to a giant ship, how could this decline? And when I say decline, I do not mean the complete extermination of the population. It only means the decline here means the end of the bright urban phase. And this was characterized by out migration to nearby regions. And this post-urban phase was again a rural phase. With some elements of continuity, means some of the practices of the mature Harappan phase continued in the later times also, whereas it also developed its own practice. So this is how the journey of Indus Valley. And one thing to note is that the Aryans came. The earliest evidence of Aryans' arrival in India is around 1500 BC. Whereas by 1750, most of the urban sites were evacuated, and what remained was only a remnant of its glorious past. So at least a gap of 250 years remain between the Aryans' arrival and the decline. So this clearly rejects the Aryan invasion as a possible cause for the decline of Indus Valley civilization, for the out-migration of Indus Valley people. Let us understand the evolution, because if we understand the evolution, we will also understand what went in favor and later what contributed to its decline. So as we have already discussed, from Mehergarh, which was the earliest agricultural community, at Mehergarh in Baluchistan in the Neolithic age around 7000 BC, we saw the beginning of domestication of plants, or in simple words, the beginning of agriculture. Later, this agricultural knowledge spread to nearby regions. And we can see from the image that the nearby regions, all of them were close to the riverine plains. And in a riverine plain, because of annual flooding, there is deposition of alluvium. We see here all these regions. We have fertile alluvium. This early Harappan phase, we saw the rise of small rural settlements. Some of the prominent sites, Kot Diji, Amri, Gyaneshwar, Kalibangan. Now note that Kalibangan, it was also a Chalcolithic site. During the discussion of Chalcolithic site, we had also understood that some of the Chalcolithic sites later transformed into a Indus Valley. Not necessarily all. And this was primarily because Chalcolithic sites, especially in southeastern Rajasthan, in the Malwa Plateau, some of the Chalcolithic sites in Rajasthan, they were very close to the later IVC sites. However, the knowledge, the technological superiority or exclusivity of Indus Valley sites remained for a long time. And even though many of the Chalcolithic sites were contemporary of Indus Valley, they could not benefit from the technological knowledge of the Indus Valley. What do we find? That it was the beginning of village community. In the village community, there were fortified settlements. When I say fortified means, just imagine that there are small houses, small residential setups. It was a common practice to fortify or surround it by a wall. Why? To guard against flood. Agricultural surplus is always the prerequisite for emergence of any urban civilization. If we go by the government's definition, what constitutes a town, then one of the very basic and important criteria is that at least 75% of the population should be involved in non-agricultural activity. It is very common sight for us to see, and also by common sense, because we are so much into it that we don't find an agricultural class in any city or even a town. Then what about the food needs of these people? The food needs is met, it is catered by the agricultural surplus generated in the nearby or even in the far-flung village. So what we find is that whenever there is a case of agricultural surplus, say in a population of 100, if 20 people are able to produce food for the entire 100, agricultural surplus also on the basis of increased agricultural yield. Now this creates a situation for dispensable labor. This creates a situation for dispensable labor or labor which is free to be employed in non-agricultural activity. So when this is there, then we can see the rise of an administrative class. We see the rise of a class which is involved in military warfare, that is the army, police. We have craftsmen, traders, merchants. So everything starts out of agricultural surplus. Everything starts out of agricultural surplus. So in the early stage, in the early Harappan stage, the agricultural yield was limited, because of which we don't find any other non-agricultural occupation. So because of limited agricultural produce, agriculture remained the primary means of livelihood. However, with agriculture, with the rise of agriculture, the need for pottery, for storage, for cooking and consumption of food. And later, over a period of time, we find that with increase in agricultural surplus, they began to store their food in granary. And the size of the granary or the inventory, it went on increasing. So the history of agriculture in any community is the history of subsistence to surplus. And then it is about export. So everywhere we find that initially agricultural produce, it is just able to meet the food needs of the community. Then we have a case of agricultural produce or agricultural surplus. And finally, the case of agricultural export. That is how it happens with all the agricultural community. Now, when over a period of time they settled in a sedentary community, one of the characteristic feature is belief system. What is a belief system? We believe in two things. One, that we can see, feel and justify with our sensory organs, and something that we cannot justify or we cannot visualize, we cannot touch, feel, taste with our senses, but we believe in because it provides answers to many of the questions. So belief in God is also something out of this. Belief in life after death is also something that is intangible, but it provides answer, at least solace, to many of the indeterminate questions. So in any sedentary community, when they are unable to unravel, answer many of the questions of nature, they integrate those questions and the vague answers under their belief system. So that is how it happens. And gradually over a period of time, our belief system is getting reformed because we are acquiring more and more knowledge. 200 years before, we did not know what was the condition on moon like. Many felt that moon was a god in India. Many felt that there was no possibility of water on Mars. Now we are able to visualize. We can see maybe in the next 300 years, we will be able to locate life on other planets as well. So belief system is also in congruence with the existing knowledge base. So in these small village communities, evidence of humpable belief in animals as gods, horned deity, and nature worships. Some of these practices continuing in the later mature Harappan phase also. And trade networks also there. So as I have said that in the case of agricultural surplus, there is a case of transfer of food from rural to urban areas. So later some inland road or land trade started. In the mature Harappan phase, the first question that should come to our mind is that what were the catalytic factors? What were those factors which enabled the transition from early rural communities, small community, to a full-fledged mature urban phase? So the first question is how this transition occurred, or what were the factors which provided for the transition from early Harappan phase to mature Harappan phase. What were those factors? One, geography, favorable geography. So geographical factors. Geographical factors, one, because of alluvium, agricultural yield increased. Second, vast coastline provided for sea trade. Third, rivers, one for riverine trade, second for alluvium. So had they not been able to build upon their agricultural potential, they would have never been able to transition from rural community to a urban community. Now again a question. These conditions were present also in the Aryan community, in the Vedic culture. Why don't we see a transition, natural transition from village community of early Vedic phase to urban community in later Vedic phase? Why don't we see that? Now, this brings us to the second point, that is the role of technology. Technology enabled them to harness the natural benefits that they had, and this technology was missing in the Vedic culture. What technology are we talking about? Technology in terms of agriculture. In terms of agriculture, tools, we will discuss them. In terms of agriculture, means of irrigation. Technology, when I talk about, I'm talking about transport, something that was not present in Vedic culture or in the Vedic community. What is the third factor? The third factor which enabled them was administration. We don't know exactly, and no wars. So we don't find any evidence of large scale weapon, any genocide, massacre, civil strife. That means in the absence of war, in the absence of tension, they were able to focus on effective use and mobilization of the resources. So because we don't have any weapon, we don't have any evidence of mass burial. So all this provided conditions for growth of trade and commerce, growth of exchange, and minimized the wastage of resources. So on the basis of all these factors and more we will discover, we find that the Harappan people, the Indus Valley people who were blessed with plentiful of natural resources, were able to graduate from a rural community to a mature, full-fledged Harappan community. There are a number of sites. From the point of view of your UPSC prelims and even mains, you don't have to remember the name of the sites. Only those sites which have been in news in the recent times are very important. For example, Harappa is a very important site. Rakhi Gadi is a very important site because Rakhi Gadi is the largest site in terms of its area spread. We have Mohenjo-Daro as a very important site. We have Dholavira as a very important site. Surko Tada is an important site. We have Lothal as an important site. We have the Lothal dockyard. It was an important port. We have Sukta Jendor as a very important site. Balakot is an important site. So these are some of the important sites. So keep a track on the current developments, and if any major discovery has been made from any of these places, take a note of these sites. So we see that some of the important urban sites are Mohenjo-Daro, Rakhi Gadi, Kalibangan, Dholavira, and obviously Harappa. We find all the features: urban planning, standardization, uniform script, standard weights and measures, seals, tools and weapons made of initially copper. Later, we find copper was used along with bronze. So IBC in terms of the usage of tools is also known as the Bronze Age. However, IBC people did not have the knowledge of iron. And over a period of time, because there was dispensable labor and there was also a case of population explosion in the urban areas, emerged a class of craftsmen who produced a number of goods such as utility goods, leather works, a carpenter making wheel. We have shipbuilding as an important craft. We have jewelry. We have pottery. All these to cater to the needs of urban population. And gradually, they began to carry out long distance trade with Mesopotamia. This long distance trade was both through the land route and the sea route. It was both ways. And because of the increasing commercial transaction that was going on, the need for accounting, and probably they also expressed their thought process belief, which we have not been able to decipher, to decode, but they knew the use of script. So the use of script was probably for accounting and also for their belief system. We do not know to what extent the use of script was for general means of communication. We also have no concrete idea of the level of literacy in the IBC community. The late Harappan phase. This was a phase which is characterized by out-migration. So from 1900 to 1300, the IBC people migrated to nearby Punjab, Haryana region, to the Sindh region and to the Gujarat region. So all these communities which experienced population increase, whereas there was declining population in the earlier Harappan sites, were rural communities. So all of them are rural communities. So we find classical case of out migration. Why did this out migration happen? What contributed to the decline is something that we will reserve towards the end of the chapter. So out migration to Punjab, out migration to Rajasthan and mostly to Gujarat region, and also to the nearby Sindh Balochistan region. We find some of the sites Kalibangan, Dholavira, Sindh, Gujarat, all these sites, and we have decline in urban characteristics. So now the element of urban planning. So in the settlements, they were not planned. We find the reuse of old bricks. Important urban structures such as drainage pattern, granary, it was missing. So probably they did not have the wherewithal to manage these vast structures. We had a localized culture. So what was also significant about Indus Valley was the uniformity in culture. Despite being a vast civilization, there was a fair degree of standardization and uniformity across multiple sites. What do we find in the later Harappan age? We find that there were localized culture. That means the pottery style of Sindh and the pottery style of Gujarat is not same. Same, the Gujarat pottery and the Gujarat beads were very different. Utensils were very different from that used in the Punjab Haryana region. So we find variations. This also says that there were micro pockets of power. Probably in the earlier times there was a administrative setup which maintained uniformity. However, elements of continuity, especially in belief system, irrigation and agricultural practices was seen. We can say in simple words that the greatest legacy or the continuing factor of IBC was its belief system, some of its rituals and agricultural practices such as cropping pattern. Barley and wheat, which was consumed then, it is at least wheat is a very primary diet of majority of Indians in north of India. So we find agricultural practices such as cropping pattern, dietary pattern, this existing in the later times as well. And we'll be discussing more about it in the legacy of Indus Valley civilization. We'll try to draw a parallel between the then IVC and the present day civilization. At its peak, just see in the map, there are a number of contemporary civilization. Huanghe Valley in China, the Tigris Euphrates Mesopotamian civilization. Tigris and Euphrates are the name of the rivers, and the Nile Valley civilization. What is common among all these civilization community is that all of them are riverine civilization. All of the community are based out of the river resources and the fertile basin. At its peak, IVC's geographical spread was like in north it was from Afghanistan, and in south some sites have been found in Maharashtra. Similarly, in the west, Baluchistan Sindh region, we have Sukta Jendor to Alamgirpur in Uttar Pradesh, which is located in the Gangetic plain. So here, the Alamgirpur in Uttar Pradesh, though it is located in the Ganga Yamuna Doab, it belongs to the Indus Valley because of the commonality of the practice, the commonality of multiple practice, and also the time period. So at its peak, it was greater than any of the contemporary civilization. It was very great in terms of kilometers also. It was such a vast civilization, greater than even the present day France and Germany. Now let us move to the characteristic features, the major landmarks or the flags which made Indus Valley civilization a unique civilization. In this map, we have the distribution of Harappan sites, something that we have already briefly mentioned, from Sukta Jendor in the Makran coast, Sukta Jendor, the westernmost, to Alamgirpur in the present day Uttar Pradesh. So Alamgirpur is located somewhere here. We have a very detailed distribution of Harappan sites, something which you should not be bothered about memorizing. Even for history optional students, as a word of advice, you should remember on keep in mind only the important sites. What we can figure out from this is that the cluster of urban sites, it is very strategically located. What we find is that first, that this entire area which I am shading is fertile. Number one, it is fertile because of the annual flooding of river Indus and its tributaries. With river, you also have the advantage of swift upstream and downstream moving through the help of boats. It is located in proximity to the Rajasthan mineralized belt. Rajasthan is known for its vast mineral resource apart from iron. So what we find is that rich mineral resource, non-ferrous, such as copper from the Khetri mines. Even today, it is obtained from the Khetri mines. We have tin, we have zinc, a number of. Later, they were able to mix copper and tin. I am writing Cu for copper to create a more sturdy alloy known as bronze. So it is also known as the bronze. It is close to the mineral belt. It has a vast coastline. See the vast coastline till the Lothal port. Lothal port was slightly located inwards, but it was connected by a spillway. So we have vast coastline. In terms of its northwest, we have a number of mountain passes. So we have mountain passes in northwest and a herder nomadic community, which is advantageous for inland trade. So what do we find? That these mountain passes were used by the herders to carry goods towards West Asia. We have the Himalayas in the northeast. So here we have Himalayas. The Himalayas provided snow melt also as a source of river, and the forested region of Kashmir, providing it with timber used for house construction and also for shipbuilding and boats, along with bullock carts. So what do we find is that the strategic location of these sites provided it with an advantage which it was able to exploit with the help of technology, and also stabilized by no law and order issues on a daily basis. Even there were no wars. So because of all these, this answers our question that why this model could not be replicated in terms of the Vedic community.